Picture this. A 5 feet 4 inches woman walks into a room full of the world's most elite soldiers. They see her small frame, hear her quiet voice, and immediately assume she's lost. What they don't know is that she's about to shatter every assumption they've ever made about strength, courage, and what it really means to be a warrior. This isn't just another military story. This is about Maya Rodriguez, a woman who proved that true power doesn't come from muscle mass or loud voices, but from an unbreakable spirit and skills that even Navy SEALs couldn't match. When a classified mission went sideways and lives hung in the balance, everyone would learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Get ready for a story that will make you question everything you think you know about heroism, because sometimes the greatest warriors come in the most unexpected packages. Maya Rodriguez stepped off the military transport plane into the scorching heat of Camp Razor, a classified training facility hidden deep in the Nevada desert. The base was so secret it didn't appear on any official maps, known only to a select few in the highest ranks of military intelligence. Sand whipped across the tarmac as she grabbed her single duffel bag, her dark hair already sticking to her neck despite being pulled back in a regulation bun. At 28, Maya had spent the last decade proving herself in ways most people couldn't imagine. She held degrees in both computer science and tactical psychology, spoke 7 languages fluently, and possessed a photographic memory that had gotten her recruited by 3 different government agencies before she turned 25. But none of that mattered to the group of men watching her approach the main building. "Are you kidding me?" Staff Sergeant Rick Morrison muttered to his teammate as they observed from the shade of a concrete barrier. Morrison was built like a linebacker, with arms the size of tree trunks and a chest that strained against his tactical vest. "They're really sending us a secretary?" His companion, Petty Officer Jake Thompson, let out a low whistle. Thompson was a decorated Navy SEAL with 12 years of combat experience and enough scars to tell stories for hours. "Maybe she's lost. Someone should probably point her toward the admin building." Maya heard every word. She'd grown used to these reactions over the years. Her slight build and quiet demeanor had fooled countless people into thinking she was weak, fragile, or out of place. What they couldn't see was the steel in her spine or the razor-sharp intelligence behind her calm brown eyes. Colonel David Hayes emerged from the main building just as Maya reached the entrance. Hayes was a legend in military circles, a man who had personally selected and trained some of the most elite soldiers in the world. His weathered face bore the marks of 30 years in service, and his piercing blue eyes missed nothing. He was expecting someone today, but surely this couldn't be her. "Excuse me, miss," Colonel Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "This is a restricted facility. Are you here to visit someone?" Maya stopped and looked up at the colonel, noting the skepticism in his expression. She'd seen that look 1,000 times before. Without saying a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of credentials that made Hayes' eyebrows shoot up to his hairline. "Maya Rodriguez reporting for Operation Nightfall, sir," she said simply, her voice steady and professional. "I believe you've been expecting me." Colonel Hayes stared at the credentials for a long moment, then back at Maya. According to his briefing, Rodriguez was supposed to be one of the most capable operatives the CIA had ever produced. Someone with skills that could potentially outmatch his best soldiers. He'd been expecting someone different, someone bigger, someone more intimidating. "You're Rodriguez?" he asked, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "Yes, sir." A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by curiosity. Word traveled fast on military bases, especially when something unusual happened. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear the whispered conversations and muffled laughter. She'd learned long ago not to let it bother her. "Follow me," Hayes said curtly, leading her inside the building. The interior of the facility was all business. Concrete walls lined with maps, tactical displays, and communication equipment. The air hummed with the constant chatter of radios and the click of keyboards as intelligence analysts worked around the clock. Maya took it all in with a quick glance, her mind automatically cataloging escape routes, security measures, and potential weaknesses. They walked down a long corridor lined with photographs of successful missions and fallen heroes. Maya recognized several faces from classified reports she'd read during her briefing. This wasn't just any training facility. This was where the military sent their absolute best for the kind of training that didn't officially exist. Colonel Hayes led her into a briefing room where 6 men sat around a metal table. Maya recognized the type immediately. These were special operations soldiers, each one handpicked for their expertise. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Reconnaissance, Delta Force. The cream of the crop. "Gentlemen," Hayes announced, "meet your new teammate for Operation Nightfall." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stood calmly in the doorway, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting for the inevitable reaction. She didn't have to wait long. "Sir, with all due respect," said Commander Steve Walsh, a SEAL team leader with a reputation for brutal honesty. "Are you serious? We're supposed to trust our lives to someone who looks like she should be teaching elementary school." A ripple of agreement went through the room. Maya had heard worse. Much worse. She remained perfectly still, her expression neutral, waiting for Colonel Hayes to respond. "Rodriguez comes highly recommended," Hayes said, though Maya could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Her record is exemplary." "Her record doing what?" asked Captain Mike Torres, a Delta Force operator with dead eyes and arms covered in tattoos. "Filing paperwork? Making coffee." Maya finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "My record includes neutralizing a terrorist cell in Prague using nothing but improvised explosives and a butter knife, taking down a human trafficking ring in Bangkok while maintaining deep cover for 6 months, and extracting a high-value target from a Somali warlord's compound while his entire security force was hunting for me." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Maya continued, her tone never changing from its calm, professional register. "I speak 7 languages fluently, have memorized the complete tactical manuals for every branch of the U.S. military, and hold advanced degrees in computer science and behavioral psychology. I could disarm 15 different types of explosive devices, pick any lock manufactured in the last 20 years, and kill a man in over 30 different ways using common household items." She paused, letting that sink in before delivering her final point. "But more importantly, gentlemen, I can do all of that without any of you noticing until it's too late. Because the one advantage I have that none of you do is that nobody ever sees me coming." Commander Walsh leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with new interest. "That's a hell of a speech. But can you back it up?" "Try me," Maya replied simply. Colonel Hayes cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should focus on the mission briefing for now. We can address team dynamics later." But Maya could see she'd already lost them. These men had trained together, fought together, bled together. They were a brotherhood forged in combat. And she was an outsider, a small, quiet outsider who claimed to be better than them. The next hour was spent going over mission details. Operation Nightfall was a hostage rescue mission in a fictional Middle Eastern country, designed to test the team's ability to work together under extreme pressure. The scenario involved infiltrating a heavily fortified compound, neutralizing enemy combatants, and extracting 3 high-value prisoners without raising an alarm. As Hayes explained the mission parameters, Maya noticed something the others had missed. The floor plan they were studying had a subtle inconsistency. The ventilation system shown on the architectural drawings didn't match the HVAC specifications listed in the technical appendix. It was the kind of detail that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe in a real-world scenario. "Colonel," Maya interrupted quietly, "I think there may be an error in these documents." Hayes looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "What kind of error?" Maya pointed to the discrepancy she'd noticed. "The ventilation shafts shown here are too narrow for the air handling units specified in the technical specs. Either the drawings are wrong, or we're looking at a modified system that might include additional security measures." The room was quiet as Hayes checked the documents. After a moment, he looked up with grudging respect. "You're right. These are training materials, and that's a deliberation built into the scenario." "Good catch." Commander Walsh snorted. "So she can read blueprints. That doesn't make her qualified for field work." "Perhaps," Hayes said. "We should find out. Tomorrow morning, you'll all participate in a training exercise designed to test individual skills. Consider it an evaluation." The meeting broke up shortly after, with the team members filing out in groups of 2 or 3. Maya remained behind, organizing her notes and studying the mission materials more closely. "Rodriguez," Colonel Hayes called as she was preparing to leave. "Yes, sir." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "These men are the best at what they do. They've earned their skepticism through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. You're going to have to prove yourself if you want their respect." "Understand, sir." "Do you? Because if you fail tomorrow, if you can't measure up to their standards, you'll be on the next transport out of here. I can't afford to have a weak link on this team, regardless of what your file says." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I won't let you down, sir." Hayes nodded curtly. "We'll see." That evening, Maya was assigned to a small barracks room at the edge of the compound. As she unpacked her few belongings, she could hear voices from the rec room down the hall. The team was bonding, sharing stories, and building the kind of camaraderie that would be essential in combat. She wasn't invited to join them. Maya had expected this. It was the same pattern she'd encountered throughout her career. The initial disbelief, followed by isolation, followed by tests designed to make her fail. She'd passed those tests before, sometimes at great personal cost. As she lay on the narrow bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, Maya thought about her father. Miguel Rodriguez had been a Marine, killed in action when Maya was 15. He'd taught her that strength came in many forms, and that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones nobody saw coming. "Prove them wrong, Mija," she whispered to herself, using the nickname he'd called her. "Show them what real strength looks like." The next morning dawned clear and brutally hot. Maya was up before sunrise, running laps around the perimeter of the base while the rest of the team slept. She'd learned long ago that discipline was her greatest weapon. While others relied on natural talent or physical advantages, she had built herself into a precision instrument through sheer force of will. By the time the others emerged for breakfast, Maya had already completed a full workout, reviewed the mission materials 3 more times, and identified 2 additional potential problems with the exercise scenario. The mess hall was a study in military efficiency. Long metal tables, folding chairs, and food that prioritized nutrition over taste. Maya grabbed a tray and loaded it with scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee before finding an empty table in the corner. She didn't have to sit alone long. Commander Walsh approached with his tray, followed by the rest of the team. They formed a semicircle around her table, their body language making it clear this wasn't a social visit. So, Walsh said, settling into the chair across from her, tell us about Prague. Maya looked up from her eggs. What would you like to know? How about the truth? Said Captain Torres. Because that story you told yesterday sounds like something out of a movie. Maya chewed thoughtfully before responding. Viktor Petrov was running arms to Chechen rebels through a network of shell companies. I spent 3 weeks as a translator for his lawyer to get close to the operation. When I finally moved, Petrov's security team had me cornered in a restaurant kitchen. I used a pressure cooker, some cleaning supplies, and a butter knife I took from the table setting. And? Prompted Torres. The explosion took out the kitchen wall and 2 of his men. I used the knife to neutralize the 3rd guard and escaped through the hole I'd created. The team exchanged glances. The story was specific enough to be believable, but incredible enough to sound made up. Prove it, said Staff Sergeant Morrison. Excuse me. If you're as good as you claim, prove it. Right now. Maya set down her fork and looked around the table at the 6 men staring at her with skeptical expressions. She'd been in this situation before. There was always a moment when talk had to become action. What did you have in mind? She asked quietly. Walsh smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We'll start simple. Hand-to-hand combat. You against Morrison. If you're really as dangerous as you claim, it shouldn't be a problem. Maya looked across the table at Morrison, who was grinning confidently. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds and had arms like steel cables. In a straight fight, she'd lose. But Maya had never been interested in straight fights. Okay, she said simply. The word sent a ripple of excitement through the mess hall. Word spread quickly, and by the time they moved outside to an improvised fighting circle, half the base had gathered to watch. Maya could hear the betting odds being called out. They weren't in her favor. Colonel Hayes appeared as the crowd was gathering, his expression thunderous. What the hell is going on here? Just a friendly sparring match, sir, Walsh said innocently. Team building exercise. Hayes looked from the eager crowd to Morrison stripping off his shirt to reveal a chest covered in muscle and scars, then, finally, to Maya, who stood quietly with her hands at her sides. This is not regulation, Hayes said firmly. I'll take full responsibility, sir, Maya said before anyone else could speak. Staff Sergeant Morrison and I were discussing training techniques. A practical demonstration seemed appropriate. Hayes stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back. Make it quick, and I don't want to see any injuries that will affect operational readiness. The crowd formed a loose circle around them. Morrison bounced on the balls of his feet, shadow boxing and rolling his massive shoulders. Maya stood perfectly still, her breathing slow and controlled. You sure about this, little lady? Morrison called out. I don't want to hurt you. Maya didn't respond. She was studying him, cataloging his movements, identifying patterns. Morrison was strong and fast, but he was also overconfident. He expected her to be afraid, to back down or fight defensively. Your move, she said quietly. Morrison charged forward with surprising speed for such a large man. His strategy was simple. Use his size and strength to overwhelm her before she could react. It was a good strategy against most opponents. Maya wasn't most opponents. At the last second, she sidestepped Morrison's rush and drove her elbow into a pressure point just below his armpit. The blow temporarily paralyzed his right arm, throwing him off balance. Before he could recover, Maya swept his legs and used his own momentum to send him crashing to the ground. Morrison hit the dirt hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The crowd went silent, shocked by how quickly the fight had ended. But Maya wasn't done. As Morrison struggled to get up, she dropped to one knee beside him and placed her thumb against a specific point on his neck. The pressure she applied wasn't enough to cause permanent damage, but it was enough to demonstrate that she could have ended the fight permanently if she'd chosen to. Carotid artery, she said quietly, so only Morrison could hear. 3 pounds of pressure would put you unconscious. 7 pounds would kill you. Do you yield? Morrison's eyes were wide with shock and pain. He tried to speak, but could only manage a strangled whisper. I yield. Maya immediately released the pressure and helped him to his feet. Morrison's right arm was still numb, but feeling was gradually returning. He stared at Maya with a mixture of respect and wariness. How did you? He started to ask. Pressure points, Maya explained simply. Most people think martial arts is about strength and speed. Really, it's about leverage and precision. The crowd began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the morning air. Maya had given them something to talk about, but she'd also made enemies. She could see it in the expressions of some of the team members. They weren't impressed by her victory. They were threatened by it. Colonel Hayes approached as Maya was dusting off her uniform. Impressive, he said grudgingly. But this was just one man in a controlled environment. Combat is chaos, Rodriguez. Can you handle chaos? Maya met his gaze steadily. There's only one way to find out, sir. Hayes nodded slowly. Indeed, there is. The exercise begins at 1,400 hours. I suggest you spend the rest of the morning preparing. As Hayes walked away, Maya found herself alone in the center of what had been the fighting circle. The team had regrouped near the barracks, their voices low, but their glances in her direction unmistakable. She'd won the first round, but the real test was still to come. Maya spent the rest of the morning in solitude, reviewing satellite images of the training area and memorizing every detail of the mission parameters. She knew she couldn't afford to make a single mistake. These men were looking for any excuse to prove she didn't belong, and they had the experience and skills to manufacture failure if they wanted to. But Maya had something they didn't expect. She had spent her entire career being underestimated, and she had learned to turn that weakness into her greatest strength. While they prepared for a straightforward military exercise, she was preparing for something much more complex. She was preparing to shatter every assumption they had about what it meant to be a soldier. The training facility buzzed with anticipation as 1,400 hours approached. Maya adjusted her tactical gear one final time, checking the weight distribution of her equipment and ensuring every piece of kit was exactly where she needed it. The exercise would test more than just combat skills. It would evaluate decision-making under pressure, teamwork, adaptability, and the kind of tactical thinking that separated elite soldiers from everyone else. Colonel Hayes gathered the team in the equipment bay, his expression serious as he outlined the final mission parameters. The mock compound they'd be infiltrating was a perfect replica of a terrorist stronghold, complete with guard towers, motion sensors, and armed opposition forces played by other elite soldiers. Your objective is simple, Hayes announced. Infiltrate the compound, neutralize all hostile forces, and extract 3 high-value prisoners without raising a general alarm. You have 4 hours to complete the mission. Any questions? Commander Walsh raised his hand. Rules of engagement, sir. Simulated ammunition only, but treat every shot as lethal. If you're tagged by enemy fire, you're out of the exercise. If the alarm is raised, you fail. If any prisoner is harmed during the extraction, you fail. Hayes paused, letting the weight of those words settle. This exercise has a 15% success rate. Most teams fail within the first hour. Maya listened carefully, but her mind was already working on a different level. While the others focused on the obvious challenges, she was thinking about what Hayes hadn't said. Why was this particular exercise so difficult? What made it different from standard hostage rescue scenarios? The answer came to her as they were transported to the drop zone. The mission briefing had mentioned 3 prisoners, but the intelligence photos showed only 2 holding cells. Either there was missing information or one of the prisoners wasn't being held where they expected. The team was dropped at a rally point 2 kilometers from the target compound. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Maya could already feel sweat gathering under her tactical vest. Commander Walsh immediately took charge, which didn't surprise anyone. He was the senior officer and had the most experience with this type of operation. What did surprise Maya was how quickly the team fell into established patterns that excluded her. Torres, you, and Morrison take the north approach, Walsh ordered. Thompson and Davis circle around to the east. Rodriguez. He paused, clearly struggling with what to do with her. You stay with me on Overwatch. Overwatch. It was a polite way of keeping her out of the real action. Maya had expected this, but it still stung. She was being sidelined before the mission even began. Sir, she said quietly, I think there might be a problem with our intelligence. Walsh barely glanced at her. What kind of problem? The briefing mentioned 3 prisoners, but the facility blueprints only show 2 holding areas. If I'm right, we might be walking into an incomplete picture. The intel is solid, Walsh replied dismissively. These exercises are carefully planned. There aren't any surprises. Maya bit back her response. She'd learned that arguing with commanding officers rarely ended well, especially when they'd already made up their minds. But she filed away her concerns. In her experience, the surprises were usually the most important part. The team spread out according to Walsh's plan, using hand signals to coordinate their approach. Maya found herself stationed on a ridge overlooking the compound, equipped with a high-powered scope and radio equipment. From her position, she could see the entire layout of the facility. The compound was impressive. High concrete walls topped with razor wires surrounded a central courtyard. Guard towers stood at each corner, manned by opposition forces with automatic weapons. Motion sensors created overlapping fields of coverage, and infrared cameras swept the perimeter in regular patterns. But Maya saw something else, something the others had missed in their initial reconnaissance. There was a third building, partially hidden behind the main structure. It wasn't on any of the blueprints they'd studied, and it wasn't mentioned in the briefing materials. If she had to guess, that's where they'd find the 3rd prisoner. Control, this is Rodriguez, she whispered into her radio. I'm seeing a structure not on our maps. Grid reference Echo 79er. Walsh's voice crackled back through her earpiece. Stay focused on your assignment, Rodriguez. We don't have time for sightseeing. Maya watched through her scope as Torres and Morrison began their approach from the north. They moved well, using the natural terrain for cover and avoiding the motion sensor fields with precision timing. Thompson and Davis were equally skilled, their eastern approach taking advantage of blind spots in the security coverage. Everything was going according to plan. Too well, in fact. Maya had participated in enough training exercises to know that something was wrong. Elite soldiers didn't make operations look this easy unless they were walking into a trap. Her instincts, honed by years of real-world operations, were screaming warnings. Control, I think we need to abort, she transmitted urgently. This feels like a setup. Rodriguez, maintain radio silence unless you have actionable intelligence, Walsh snapped back. We're going in. Maya watched helplessly as the 4-man assault team reached the compound walls. Torres produced a small explosive charge, carefully placing it against a section of wall that should have given them access to the prisoner holding area. The explosion was controlled and quiet, exactly the kind of precision work expected from elite soldiers. But as soon as the wall breached, alarms began sounding throughout the compound. The trap had been sprung. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night to day around the compound. Opposition forces poured from concealed positions, their weapons trained on the breach point. Maya could hear the distinctive crack of simulated ammunition as the exercise suddenly became a desperate firefight. "We're compromised," Torres shouted over the radio. "Multiple hostiles, heavy fire. Fall back." Walsh ordered, "Regroup at Rally Point Alpha." But it was too late. Through her scope, Maya could see the team members being systematically tagged out by enemy fire. Morrison went down first, caught in crossfire from 2 guard positions. Thompson lasted 30 seconds longer before a sniper in the overlooking tower got him. Torres and Davis managed to make it back to the breach point, but they were pinned down by overwhelming enemy fire. It was only a matter of time before they were eliminated as well. Maya made a decision that would change everything. Instead of retreating to the rally point as ordered, she began moving toward the compound. Her route took her away from the main action, circling wide to approach from the southwest where the opposition forces had concentrated their attention on the breach. "Rodriguez, where the hell are you going?" Walsh's voice was sharp with anger and concern. "To complete the mission, sir," Maya replied calmly. "I ordered you to fall back. With respect, sir, the mission comes first." Maya switched off her radio before Walsh could respond. She'd broken protocol, disobeyed direct orders, and probably ended her military career. But for men were about to fail an exercise that could define their futures, and she had the skills to prevent that failure. The compound security was focused outward, designed to prevent infiltration from the obvious approach routes. But Maya had never been interested in obvious approaches. While the opposition forces concentrated on the dramatic breach at the north wall, she found a maintenance access point that didn't appear on any security diagram. The ventilation system she'd noticed the day before provided exactly the access route she needed. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for a small frame, but it led directly into the heart of the compound. Larger soldiers would never have been able to make the passage. Maya moved through the ventilation system with careful precision, using techniques she'd learned in specialized urban warfare training. The shaft was dark and cramped, filled with dust and mechanical noise that masked her movements. After 20 minutes of careful crawling, she reached a grate that overlooked the main prisoner holding area. Below her, 2 opposition guards were discussing the firefight happening outside. They were relaxed, confident that their perimeter security had contained the threat. They had no idea that the real danger was already inside their defenses. Maya removed the grate with practiced silence and dropped into the room behind the guards. Her movements were fluid and economical, the result of thousands of hours of training. The first guard went down to a blood choke, unconscious before he could cry out. The second guard managed to turn around before Maya's strike to his solar plexus doubled him over, and a follow-up blow to the back of his neck put him down for the count. The holding area contained 2 cells, just as the blueprints had indicated. But they were empty. Maya's instincts had been correct. The real prisoners were being held in the hidden building she'd spotted from her overwatch position. The empty cells were just another layer of deception in an exercise designed to test more than combat skills. Getting to the 3rd building required crossing the compound's central courtyard while the opposition forces were still engaged with Walsh's team at the north wall. Maya used the confusion to her advantage. moving from shadow to shadow with the kind of tactical patience that came from real-world experience. The hidden building was smaller than the main structure, but more heavily fortified. Two guards stood at the entrance, alert and professional. Maya couldn't take them both simultaneously without raising an alarm, so she needed a different approach. She found it in the form of a maintenance ladder that led to the building's roof. The climb was exposed, but the guards were focused on the ground-level approaches. Maya reached the roof undetected and found exactly what she was hoping for, another ventilation access point. This shaft led directly to the building's interior, where Maya could hear voices. She positioned herself above a ceiling grate and listened carefully. 3 opposition soldiers were discussing the exercise, confident that they'd successfully thwarted the infiltration attempt. But more importantly, Maya could see 3 figures in military uniforms bound and seated against a far wall. The missing prisoners. Maya dropped through the ceiling into the middle of the room, landing silently behind the 3 guards. Her movements were a blur of precision and efficiency. The first guard went down to a kidney strike that left him writhing on the floor. The second managed to turn and raise his weapon before Maya's elbow, strike to his throat, sent him crashing into the wall. The third guard was the most experienced, managing to get off a shot before Maya's combination of strikes put him down. But the shot had been fired. Even though it was simulated ammunition, the sound would alert other opposition forces. Maya had perhaps 2 minutes before the building was surrounded. The 3 prisoners were Colonel Hayes himself, along with 2 other senior officers who were acting as high-value targets for the exercise. Hayes stared at Maya with undisguised shock as she cut their restraints with tactical efficiency. "Rodriguez? How the hell did you get in here?" "Long story, sir. We need to move. Now." The others, pinned down at the north breach. "This was a trap, just like I suspected." Hayes nodded grimly. "I know. This exercise was designed to test adaptability when the original plan fails. Most teams never get past the first 10 minutes. Then, why didn't you warn us?" "Because the point isn't to succeed with perfect information. It's to succeed when everything goes wrong." Maya could hear voices approaching the building. The opposition forces had realized their secure facility had been compromised. In moments, they'd be surrounded with nowhere to go. But Maya had already planned for this contingency. "There's a storm drain that runs under the compound," she explained quickly as she helped the prisoners to their feet. "I spotted it during my initial reconnaissance. It connects to a drainage canal about half a kilometer from here." "You want us to go underground?" one of the other officers asked skeptically. "Unless you have a better idea, sir." The storm drain access was in the building's basement, concealed behind a maintenance panel that Maya had noticed during her approach. The space was tight and dark, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, but it provided a route that bypassed all the compound's surface security. The journey through the drainage system was uncomfortable and claustrophobic, but Maya led the way with the confidence of someone who had studied every detail of the terrain. After 30 minutes of careful movement, they emerged from a culvert outside the compound's perimeter. From their hiding spot in the drainage canal, Maya could see the compound in chaos. Spotlights swept the desert as opposition forces searched for the missing prisoners. The original breach point was still the focus of heavy fighting, with Walsh and the remaining team members pinned down, but continuing to engage. Maya activated her radio. "Control, this is Rodriguez. Package is secure and clear of the facility." The response was immediate and stunned. "Rodriguez, confirm your last transmission. 3 packages extracted and secured. Mission accomplished." Silence filled the radio channel for several long seconds before Hayes took the handset from Maya. "Command, this is Package 1. Rodriguez has successfully completed the extraction. All objectives achieved. The compound's alarm system suddenly went silent. Exercise lights replaced the harsh white spotlights, and the opposition forces began standing down. The simulation was over. Maya had done what an entire team of elite soldiers couldn't accomplish. She'd completed the mission while operating alone, improvising solutions to problems the others hadn't even recognized, and extracting the prisoners without raising the general alarm until after the fact. The ride back to base was quiet. Maya sat in the back of the transport vehicle while the rest of the team processed what had happened. She'd disobeyed direct orders, broken protocol, and succeeded where they had failed. It was the kind of performance that either made careers or ended them, depending on how the chain of command chose to interpret her actions. Colonel Hayes had been uncharacteristically quiet since the extraction, studying Maya with an expression she couldn't read. The other officers seemed equally uncertain about how to react. She'd saved the mission, but she'd also made them all look incompetent in the process. Back at Camp Razor, the team was debriefed separately. Maya found herself alone in a conference room with Colonel Hayes and two other senior officers she didn't recognize. Their questions were pointed and professional, covering every aspect of her decision-making process and tactical choices. You disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer, one of the unknown officers pointed out. That's a court-martial offense. Yes, sir, Maya replied simply. I made a judgment call that completing the mission took priority over following orders that would have resulted in failure. That's not how military command structure works, Rodriguez. With respect, sir, that's exactly how special operations work. Elite soldiers are expected to exercise independent judgment when circumstances require it. Colonel Hayes leaned forward. Tell me about the ventilation system. How did you know it would provide access? I noticed the discrepancy between the architectural drawings and the HVAC specifications during yesterday's briefing. When I saw the compound layout, I realized the ventilation system had been modified to include access points that weren't in our intelligence package. And the storm drain? Geological survey data indicated the area had significant water management infrastructure. I spent time this morning studying satellite imagery and identified the drainage patterns. The questions continued for another hour, covering every detail of Maya's approach and execution. When they were finally finished, the officers conferred quietly while Maya waited at attention. Rodriguez, Hayes said finally, you've created a problem. Maya's heart sank. She'd known this moment might come, but she'd hoped her success would outweigh her breach of protocol. Sir, your performance today was extraordinary. You identified problems others missed, adapted to changing circumstances, and completed an objective that has defeated some of the most elite soldiers in our military. Hayes paused, but you also demonstrated a willingness to disregard orders when you disagree with them. I understand, sir. Do you? Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change your life. Maya waited, unsure what was coming next. The exercise you just completed wasn't really an exercise. It was an evaluation. We've been watching you for months, Rodriguez. Your record, your psychological profile, your performance under pressure. This entire scenario was designed specifically to test your capabilities. Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Sir, Operation Nightfall is real. In 72 hours, you and a hand-picked team will infiltrate an actual terrorist stronghold in Syria. The mission parameters are identical to what you just completed, except the stakes will be measured in real lives, not simulation scores. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Everything she just experienced, all the preparation and training had been leading to this moment. The men you just outperformed, Hayes continued, are some of the best soldiers in the world. But what you demonstrated today is something different. Something we need for this mission. What's that, sir? Hay smiled for the first time since Maya had arrived at Camp Razor. You think like our enemies do. You see opportunities where others see obstacles. You turn disadvantages into advantages. He paused. Most importantly, you don't think like a soldier. You think like a ghost. Maya absorbed this information, understanding finally why her arrival had been met with such skepticism. These men weren't just evaluating a new team member. They were evaluating someone who might be better at their jobs than they were. There's just one problem, Hayes added. This team needs to work together seamlessly. After today's performance, I'm not sure that's possible. Through the conference room window, Maya could see the other team members gathered around a table in the mess hall. Their body language told the whole story. They were discussing her, and from their expressions, the conversation wasn't positive. They think I made them look bad, Maya said quietly. You didn't make them look bad. The question is whether they could get past their egos long enough to recognize that you might be exactly what this mission needs. Maya turned away from the window. What happens if they can't? Then we run the mission with a divided team, and people die. Hay stood up, his expression grim. Or we find someone else to fill your role, and people probably die anyway. The choice was laid out starkly. Maya could continue to be an outsider, fighting for acceptance while preparing for a mission that might not succeed. Or she could find a way to bridge the gap between her capabilities and their expectations. But as she looked out at the 6 men who would be her teammates, Maya realized the real challenge wasn't proving she belonged. It was proving that they all belonged together. The mission that would define all of their futures was less than 72 hours away, and the clock was already ticking. The tension in the mess hall was thick enough to cut with a knife as Maya entered for dinner that evening. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and 6 pairs of eyes tracked her movement to an empty table in the corner. She'd expected this reaction, but it still stung. These men had been her teammates for less than 24 hours, and already she'd created a divide that might prove impossible to bridge. Maya selected her meal mechanically, her mind focused on the revelation Colonel Hayes had shared. In 60 hours, they would be wheels up for Syria. The mission that had seemed like an elaborate training exercise was actually a real-world operation with stakes measured in human lives. 3 American intelligence operatives were being held in a terrorist compound outside Aleppo, and diplomatic channels had failed to secure their release. She found a table in the corner and began eating in silence, acutely aware of the whispered conversations happening around her. The other team members had clustered together at their usual table, their voices low, but their gestures animated. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were discussing her performance and questioning whether she could be trusted. After 10 minutes of uncomfortable silence, Commander Walsh approached her table. His expression was carefully neutral, but Maya could see the conflict in his eyes. Walsh was a professional, trained to put mission success above personal feelings, but he was also human. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Maya gestured to the empty chair across from her. "It's your base, Commander." Walsh settled into the chair and studied Maya for a moment before speaking. "That was quite a performance today. I completed the mission. You completed the mission by ignoring orders and going off on your own. In a real combat situation, that kind of cowboy behavior gets people killed." Maya set down her fork and met Walsh's gaze directly. In a real combat situation, following orders that lead to mission failure gets people killed too. I made a judgment call. A judgment call that made the rest of us look like amateurs. There it was. The real issue wasn't her tactical choices or her breach of protocol. It was wounded pride. These men had spent years building reputations as the best of the best, and she'd undermined that reputation in a single afternoon. That wasn't my intention, Maya said quietly. Maybe not, but that was the result. Walsh leaned forward. Look, Rodriguez, I've read your file. Your record is impressive, and what you did today proves you have skills. But this team works because we trust each other. We know each other's capabilities, limitations, and decision-making patterns. You're an unknown variable. Maya nodded slowly. She understood the concern, even if she disagreed with the conclusion. So what are you proposing? We have 58 hours before mission launch. I want to spend that time running integrated exercises, getting familiar with how you operate, and figuring out how to incorporate your skills into our tactical framework. It was a reasonable request, and Maya recognized the olive branch Walsh was extending. I'm willing to work with the team, Commander, but I need to know that my input will be considered, not dismissed. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. The exercise today caught us off guard because we didn't expect the scenario parameters to change. You adapted better than we did, and that's on us. But going forward, we need to operate as a unit. Agreed. Walsh extended his hand across the table. Fresh start. Maya shook his hand, feeling some of the tension ease. Fresh start. The next morning brought a series of intensive training exercises designed to test team dynamics and tactical integration. Colonel Hayes had arranged for the use of a different facility, one that replicated urban combat environments rather than the desert compound they'd trained in previously. The exercises started simple: room clearing, coordinated movement, communication protocols. Maya quickly discovered that integrating her skills with the team's established patterns was more challenging than operating alone. These men had worked together for months, developing an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and intentions. She was disrupting that flow, but gradually patterns began to emerge. Torres and Morrison were the heavy hitters specialized in direct action and frontal assaults. Thompson and Davis excelled at precision shooting and overwatch positions. Walsh was the coordinator, the one who saw the bigger picture and made tactical adjustments in real time. Maya's role was different. She was the wild card, the one who found solutions that others couldn't see. While the team approached problems with overwhelming force and superior training, Maya approached them with subtlety and misdirection. The breakthrough came during their third exercise of the day. The scenario involved rescuing a hostage from a fortified building while enemy reinforcements were en route. The team's initial approach was direct: establish fire superiority, breach the building, neutralize threats, and extract the hostage. It was a sound plan, but Maya saw a problem. The building had been designed with overlapping fields of fire that would make a frontal assault costly in terms of both time and casualties. While the team prepared their approach, Maya studied the structure and noticed something they'd missed. "Commander," she said quietly, "what if we don't breach the building at all?" Walsh looked up from his tactical display. "Explain." "The hostage is being held on the third floor, but there's a construction crane adjacent to the building. If someone could reach the crane's boom, they could access the third floor directly through the windows. That's a 30-meter climb with no cover," Torres pointed out. "Suicide mission. Not if the rest of the team maintains suppressive fire to keep the enemy focused on ground-level threats," Maya replied. "While you're conducting your frontal assault, I could be extracting the hostage from an unexpected direction." The team exchanged glances. It was the kind of unconventional thinking that made them uncomfortable, but they couldn't deny the tactical merit of the idea. "It's risky," Walsh said finally. "So is a frontal assault against a prepared position," Maya countered. "But this way, we have multiple options. If my approach fails, you proceed with the original plan. If it succeeds, we complete the mission faster and with fewer casualties. Walsh considered this for a moment, then nodded. Let's try it. The exercise that followed was a perfect demonstration of how Maya's skills could complement rather than replace traditional tactics. While the team engaged the enemy forces with disciplined fire and movement, Maya scaled the construction crane with the kind of confidence that came from years of urban warfare training. The climb was exposed and dangerous, just as Torres had predicted. But Maya's small size and superior upper body strength, honed by countless hours of rock climbing and gymnastics training, allowed her to move quickly and efficiently. By the time the enemy forces realized what was happening, she was already through the third-floor window. The hostage extraction took less than 2 minutes. Maya neutralized the 2 guards with the same precise efficiency she'd demonstrated against Morrison, secured the hostage, and rappelled down the building's exterior using climbing gear from her tactical kit. The entire operation was completed before the main assault team had even breached the ground floor. When the exercise ended, there was a different quality to the silence that followed. This time, it wasn't skepticism or wounded pride. It was professional appreciation. Outstanding work, Walsh said simply. Both the individual performance and the team coordination. Maya felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal validation. For the first time since arriving at Camp Razor, she felt like part of a team rather than an outsider trying to prove her worth. The remaining training exercises built on this success. The team learned to incorporate Maya's unconventional approaches into their tactical planning, while Maya learned to communicate her ideas in ways that supported rather than challenged their established methods. By the end of the day, they were operating with the kind of seamless coordination that Colonel Hayes had been hoping to see. That evening, Maya was invited to join the team's usual post-training discussion in the recreation room. It was a small gesture, but significant. These conversations were where the real team building happened, where tactical lessons were analyzed and personal bonds were strengthened. So, Morrison said as Maya settled into one of the worn chairs, "Tell us about Bangkok." Maya raised an eyebrow. "What do you want to know?" "The human trafficking ring you mentioned. How does someone maintain deep cover for 6 months without blowing their identity?" It was a professional question, the kind that soldiers asked when they wanted to learn rather than test. Maya recognized the shift in tone and responded accordingly. "The key is building a believable backstory that can withstand scrutiny," she explained. "I posed as a traveling photographer documenting Southeast Asian street culture. It gave me a reason to be in different locations, ask questions, and take pictures without arousing suspicion." "But how did you get close to the traffickers?" Thompson asked. "Patience. I spent 3 months establishing my cover identity, building relationships, and gaining trust. The photography work was actually legitimate, which helped sell the deception. When I finally made contact with the trafficking organization, I was just another foreign tourist looking for unique experiences." The questions continued for another hour, covering tactics, tradecraft, and the kind of operational details that only came from real-world experience. Maya found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone, while the team members opened up about their own operations and challenges. It was during this conversation that Maya realized something important had changed. These men were no longer seeing her as a threat to their status or an outsider who didn't belong. They were seeing her as a fellow professional with skills and experiences that could benefit the team. The next day brought final preparations for the Syria mission. Intelligence updates, equipment checks, and detailed rehearsals of every phase of the operation. The target was a compound in the desert outside Aleppo, where 3 American intelligence officers were being held by a terrorist group calling itself the Desert Brigade. The intelligence picture was grim. The compound was heavily fortified, with multiple guard positions and sophisticated security systems. The Desert Brigade was known for executing hostages when rescue attempts were detected, which meant the team would have one chance to get it right. But as Maya studied the intelligence materials, she noticed something familiar. The compound's layout bore striking similarities to the training facility they'd used 2 days earlier. The same defensive positions, the same blind spots, the same potential access routes. "Colonel," she said during the final briefing, "this compound design looks familiar." Hayes nodded grimly. "The training exercise was based on current intelligence. We wanted you to be as prepared as possible for what you'd face in the field." "Then, we know it works," Maya said with quiet confidence. "We know our approach will succeed." But Hayes shook his head. The exercise was conducted under controlled conditions with known variables. The real world doesn't offer the same predictability. He was right, of course. Real combat was chaos, filled with unexpected complications and split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. But Maya had operated in that chaos before, and she'd learned to thrive in it. The flight to Syria took 18 hours, with fuel stops in Germany and Turkey. The team used the time to review mission protocols and conduct final equipment checks. Maya found herself sitting next to Torres, who had been one of her harshest critics during the first day. "You nervous?" he asked as they flew over the Mediterranean. Maya considered the question. "Not nervous. Focused. First time leading a mission like this." "I'm not leading anything. Walsh is the mission commander." Torres smiled. "Maybe officially, but we all know today's success depends on you seeing something the rest of us miss." It was a remarkable admission from someone who had questioned her qualifications just 48 hours earlier. Maya realized that the team's perception of her role had evolved from unwanted addition to critical asset. The insertion went exactly as planned. A stealth helicopter dropped them at a rally point 15 kilometers from the target, and they covered the remaining distance on foot using night vision and careful navigation. The desert landscape was harsh and unforgiving, but Maya had trained in similar environments throughout her career. They reached the observation point just before dawn, giving them several hours to conduct final reconnaissance and prepare for the assault. Through high-powered scopes, Maya could see the compound exactly as it appeared in the intelligence photos. Guard towers, razor wire, motion sensors, and armed patrols following predictable patterns. But something was different. There was more activity than the intelligence had suggested, with additional vehicles and personnel that hadn't been accounted for in their planning. "Looks like they're expecting company," Walsh observed. Maya studied the compound through her own scope, counting personnel and tracking movement patterns. After 20 minutes of careful observation, she made a disturbing realization. "They're not expecting company," she said quietly. "They're preparing to move the prisoners." Walsh focused his scope on the area Maya was indicating. Near the main building, several vehicles were being loaded with supplies and equipment. It was exactly the kind of preparation that preceded a location change. "How long do we have?" Walsh asked. Maya checked her watch. "Based on their activity level, I'd guess they'll be ready to move within 6 hours. Maybe less." This changed everything. The mission had been planned for a night assault with extensive preparation time. Now they were facing a compressed timeline with unknown variables. "We need to move now," Maya said, "before they can relocate the prisoners to a site we haven't studied." Walsh was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks. A hasty assault increased the danger for everyone, but waiting might mean losing the prisoners entirely. "What's your assessment?" he asked finally. Maya continued studying the compound, her mind working through dozens of tactical scenarios. The increased activity is actually an advantage. More people means more distractions and more opportunities for misdirection. If we move during their preparations, their attention will be divided between security and logistics. Recommendations: we stick to the basic plan, but accelerate the timeline. Torres and Morrison create a diversion at the North Gate. Thompson and Davis provide overwatch from the eastern ridge. You and I go in through the ventilation system and extract the prisoners while they're dealing with the diversion. It was essentially the same approach they'd used in the training exercise, adapted for current conditions. Walsh nodded slowly, recognizing the tactical soundness of the plan. Let's do it. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of final preparations and coordinated movement. The team moved into position with the same precision they demonstrated during training, but Maya could feel the difference. This was real combat, with real consequences for failure. Maya and Walsh reached the compound's ventilation access point without detection, while Torres and Morrison prepared their diversion at the main gate. The plan called for a carefully timed sequence that would draw the guard's attention away from the prisoner holding area. Diversion in 30 seconds, Torres whispered through the radio. Maya positioned herself at the ventilation grate, ready to drop into the compound. Through the metal slats, she could see 2 guards discussing the vehicle loading operations. In moments, those guards would be responding to an apparent attack at the front gate. The explosion that marked Torres and Morrison's diversion was louder than expected, and the response was immediate. Alarms blared throughout the compound as guards rushed toward the perceived threat. Maya and Walsh dropped through the ventilation system into an empty corridor. The prisoner holding area was exactly where the intelligence had indicated, but as they approached, Maya realized there was a problem. The area was too quiet, too empty. Something was wrong. She held up a hand to stop Walsh and listened carefully. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of combat as Torres and Morrison engaged the guards at the front gate. But here, in what should have been the most secure part of the compound, there was only silence. Maya peered around the corner into the holding area and saw what she'd feared. The cells were empty. The prisoners had already been moved. "They're gone," she whispered into her radio. Walsh's response was immediate and urgent. "Are you certain?" "Positive. Cells are empty. No signs of recent occupation." This was the scenario they'd hoped to avoid. The prisoners had been relocated before the assault, probably to the vehicles Maya had observed being loaded. If those vehicles left the compound, the rescue mission would become a recovery operation. But Maya wasn't ready to give up. The increased activity she'd observed suggested the move was recent, probably within the last few hours. That meant the prisoners might still be somewhere in the compound, just not where the intelligence had indicated. "Walsh, I'm going to check the vehicle loading area. The prisoners might be staged there for transport." "Negative. Too much exposure. We abort and regroup." Maya understood the tactical wisdom of Walsh's decision, but she also understood that this might be their only chance. Once the vehicles left the compound, the prisoners would disappear into the Syrian desert, and the rescue mission would be over. "I can reach the loading area through the building's interior corridors," Maya transmitted. 60 seconds to check and confirm. "Rodriguez, I'm ordering you to abort and exfiltrate." Maya looked at Walsh, who was positioned at the corridor intersection providing security. She could see the conflict in his expression. As mission commander, his priority was bringing his team home safely. But they both knew that leaving without attempting to locate the prisoners meant abandoning 3 American operatives to almost certain death. 60 seconds, Maya repeated, and began moving toward the loading area before Walsh could respond. The corridor system was more complex than the building plans had indicated, with additional security doors and checkpoint areas that slowed Maya's progress. But her memory for architectural details and her ability to navigate complex structures served her well. She reached the loading area just as the last of the supplies were being loaded into the vehicles. Through a window overlooking the loading dock, Maya could see 3 figures in American military uniforms being escorted toward one of the trucks. The prisoners were alive, but they were about to be transported out of the compound. Maya activated her radio one final time. "Control, I have visual contact with the packages. They're being loaded for transport. I can intercept." Walsh's response came immediately. "Negative. Too many hostiles in the area. We abort now." But Maya was already moving. The loading dock had a skylight that provided access from the roof level, and her climbing skills would allow her to reach it quickly. She had perhaps 90 seconds before the vehicles departed, carrying the prisoners beyond rescue. The climb to the skylight was exposed and dangerous, but Maya had made similar ascents dozens of times during her career. She reached the roof access just as the truck engines started below. Through the glass, she could see the 3 prisoners being secured in the back of the lead vehicle. Maya's tactical kit included enough explosive charges to breach the skylight and create the kind of distraction that might allow her to extract the prisoners. But using explosives would alert every guard in the compound and probably result in her death along with the prisoners she was trying to save. Instead, she made a different choice. Maya dropped through the skylight silently, landing among the stacked supplies in the loading dock. The guards were focused on securing the prisoners and preparing the vehicles for departure. None of them noticed the small figure moving through the shadows. The lead vehicle's rear compartment was secured with a simple padlock, the kind Maya could defeat in seconds with the right tools. But the guards were too close, and there wasn't time for a subtle approach. Maya waited until the guards moved toward the front of the vehicle, then struck with the kind of devastating efficiency that had become her trademark. The first guard went down to a blood choke before he could cry out. The second guard managed to turn around before Maya's strike to his solar plexus doubled him over, followed by a precise blow to the back of his neck. The truck driver was still in the cab, unaware that his security team had been neutralized. Maya opened the rear compartment and quickly cut the prisoner's restraints while explaining the situation in urgent whispers. 3 American operatives, correct? Affirmative, replied the senior prisoner, a CIA officer named Patterson. But there's a problem. They're planning to execute us if any rescue is attempted. There are explosive devices wired to the vehicle. Maya's heart sank. The terrorist group had prepared for exactly this scenario. Any attempt to extract the prisoners from a vehicle would result in their deaths, along with those of their rescuers. But Maya had dealt with improvised explosive devices before. Her training included advanced techniques for disarming the kind of crude but effective bombs that terrorist groups typically employed. "Where are the devices?" she asked. Patterson pointed to several locations around the vehicle's interior. Pressure switches under the seats, motion detectors on the doors, and what looks like a remote trigger system. Maya examined the devices quickly, her mind working through disarmament procedures. The bombs were sophisticated enough to be dangerous, but crude enough to be defeated by someone with the right knowledge and steady hands. "I can disarm them, but it's going to take time we don't have." Through the loading dock's windows, Maya could see additional vehicles being prepared and more guards moving into position. The diversion created by Torres and Morrison was beginning to lose its effectiveness, and the compound security was adapting to the threat. That's when Maya made the decision that would define not just the mission, but her entire relationship with the team. Instead of trying to disarm the explosives, she began removing them from the vehicle entirely. Her knowledge of bomb construction allowed her to identify the components that could be safely relocated and those that had to remain in place. It was delicate work, requiring the kind of precision that came from years of specialized training. "What are you doing?" Patterson asked urgently. "Moving the problem," Maya replied as she carefully relocated the first explosive device to a stack of supply crates. "If we can't disarm the bombs, we'll make sure they explode somewhere that doesn't hurt anyone." It took 8 minutes to relocate all the explosive devices, precious time that Maya could hear running out as the sounds of combat intensified outside. But finally, the vehicle was clear and the prisoners were ready to move. The extraction route Maya had planned took them through the same ventilation system she'd used to enter the compound. It was tight quarters for 4 people, but it provided concealment from the guards who were now actively searching for the missing prisoners. They reached Walsh's position just as the relocated explosives detonated in the loading dock. The explosion was massive, destroying the supply vehicles and creating enough chaos to mask their escape through the compound's rear perimeter. The exfiltration went exactly as planned, with Thompson and Davis providing overwatch while the team moved to the extraction point. Torres and Morrison had successfully disengaged from their diversionary attack and were already at the rally point when Maya arrived with the rescued prisoners. The helicopter extraction was completed without incident, and within an hour, they were safely in Turkish airspace with 3 rescued American operatives. It wasn't until they were back at the forward operating base that the full impact of Maya's performance became clear. She had identified problems that others had missed, adapted to changing circumstances in real time, and completed an extraction that many experts would have considered impossible. But more importantly, she had done it as part of a team. Colonel Hayes was waiting for them at the debriefing facility, his expression unreadable as he listened to Walsh's mission report. When the commander finished his account, Hayes turned to Maya with an expression that might have been respect. "Outstanding work, Rodriguez. All of you." Maya felt a surge of satisfaction, not just from mission success, but from Hayes' use of the plural. She was no longer an outsider trying to prove her worth. She was part of a team that had just accomplished something extraordinary. Over the following days, as the mission was analyzed and documented, Maya began to understand how much had changed. The skepticism and isolation she'd faced during her first days at Camp Razor had been replaced by professional respect and genuine camaraderie. Torres approached her during breakfast on their last morning at the forward operating base. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. Maya looked up from her coffee. "For what?" "For assuming you didn't belong. For thinking that small meant weak or quiet meant incapable." Torres sat down across from her. "You saved 3 lives yesterday, and you did it by being exactly who you are, not by trying to be someone else." It was a remarkable admission from someone who had questioned her capabilities so harshly just a week earlier. But Maya recognized it as more than just an apology. It was an acknowledgement that strength came in many forms, and that the most dangerous warriors weren't always the ones who looked the part. "We all saved 3 lives, Maya replied. "That's what teams do." Torres smiled. "Yeah, that's what teams do." Later that day, as they prepared to return to the United States, Commander Walsh pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. "I've been authorized to offer you a permanent position with the team," he said. "Full integration, advanced training, and deployment rotation." Interested, Maya considered the offer. A month ago, she would have jumped at the chance to join an elite special operations unit. But now, having proven herself in the most demanding circumstances possible, the choice felt different. What about the others? Are they comfortable with having me as a permanent team member? Walsh smiled. Rodriguez, after what you accomplished in Syria, I think they'd be more comfortable knowing you were watching their backs than wondering where you were. That evening, Maya found herself back in the recreation room with the team, sharing stories and planning for future operations. The conversations were different now, filled with the kind of easy camaraderie that came from shared danger and mutual respect. Morrison was in the middle of describing a particularly challenging mission in Afghanistan when he paused and looked at Maya. "You know what I realized today?" he said. "What's that?" "That day when we sparred, you weren't trying to humiliate me. You were showing me something I needed to understand." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Which was that the most dangerous person in any room isn't always the biggest or the loudest or the most obvious." Morrison paused. "Sometimes it's the one nobody sees coming." Maya smiled, remembering her father's words about strength coming in many forms. She'd spent her entire career being underestimated, turning the perceived weakness into her greatest advantage. But now, for the first time, she was part of a team that understood and valued those advantages. As the conversation continued around her, Maya reflected on how much had changed since her arrival at Camp Razor. She'd proven that size and strength weren't the only measures of a soldier's worth. She'd demonstrated that sometimes the best tactical solutions came from thinking differently rather than thinking harder. And, most importantly, she'd shown that the most effective teams weren't built on uniformity, but on diversity of skills and approaches. The Scoffers had become believers, not because Maya had changed who she was, but because she'd shown them who she'd always been. A warrior whose greatest strength lay not in her ability to overpower opponents, but in her capacity to outthink them. Colonel Hayes had been right during that first briefing. Maya was dangerous, not in spite of her appearance, but because of it. She was the soldier nobody saw coming, the operative who could accomplish the impossible precisely because everyone underestimated her capabilities. And now, finally, she was home.